I was standing in the bakery aisle with a chocolate cake in one hand and a bag of coffee in the other, calling my mom to ask what time to come over when she went quiet and said, "Oh, we already did Christmas last night." I laughed because I thought it was a joke. Then my dad grabbed the phone and said, "Honestly, it was easier without you here." An hour later, I gave that untouched cake to an 8-year-old girl living in a family shelter. 3 hours after that, my mother was screaming at me about a house she thought was already hers. Stick around because what happened over the next few months completely rewired what I thought family meant. And if stories like this hit you the way they hit me, hit subscribe now because you do not want to miss where this one ends up. My name is Reagan. I'm 34. And a year ago, my family found out exactly how much they could get away with, right up until the moment they couldn't anymore. That morning started like every other holiday morning of my adult life, a mental checklist running on a loop before my eyes were even fully open. Wrap the last gifts. Grab dessert. Don't forget mom's favorite coffee. Get to my parents' house early enough to help before anyone else showed up. Outside my apartment in Kentwood, Michigan, the sky had that flat, colorless gray that Midwest winters specialize in, and a thin crust of frost covered every car on the street. One of the gifts stacked by my dining table wasn't really a gift at all. It was an envelope, a symbolic placeholder for something far too big to wrap. 2 months earlier, I had bought my parents a house. It was a modest one-story bungalow in Wyoming, Michigan, about 20 minutes from where they lived, close to their doctor, a grocery store, and a park with flat, easy walking paths my mom loved. Not a mansion. $312,600, it wasn't about extravagance. It was 11 years of living below my income, saving every bonus, letting profit-sharing checks sit untouched, quietly believing that someday all of it would turn into something real. That someday had finally arrived. I bought the house outright, fully intending to transfer it to my parents right after Christmas. My attorney had already drawn up the paperwork. Nothing had closed yet, the title was still entirely mine, but emotionally, in every way that mattered to me, it already belonged to them. I'd walked them through it twice already. My mom had stood in the living room with a tape measure, debating curtain lengths and whether the dining table would look better near the bay window. My dad had claimed the second bedroom for a reading chair, joking that he was finally old enough to admit he wanted one. Watching them imagine their life, there had been half the gift. I thought the other half would be seeing their faces when I made it official. I had no idea, packing gifts into my trunk that morning, that I would end that day taking it all back. I'd always been the one who made family gatherings work. Nobody had ever officially assigned me the role. It had just piled up, one invisible task at a time, until it became who everyone assumed I was. I remembered which aunt hated pecans. I tracked my sister Paige's work schedule so I could tell caterers when to expect her. I kept spare gifts in my trunk for whenever my dad forgot someone's. I arrived first and left last. None of it had ever felt like sacrifice. Felt like proof I belonged. But over the last couple of years, I'd started noticing something uncomfortable. Keeping the peace increasingly meant I was the one expected to swallow whatever made everyone else uncomfortable. 2 weeks before that Christmas, we'd all been at my parents' table when my dad made one of his jokes at Paige's expense, the kind everyone laughed at fast enough that he never had to think twice about it. Paige just stared at her plate, pushing a piece of broccoli around with her fork. I didn't make a scene. I just told him calmly that the joke wasn't funny and Paige clearly didn't appreciate it. The room went silent for maybe 3 seconds. My dad rolled his eyes and said I'd gotten too serious about everything lately. My mom later told me he thought I'd changed the mood. That phrase stuck with me for about a day and then disappeared under work deadlines and holiday shopping lists. I had no idea it had already become evidence in a case against me I didn't know was being built. Stick with me here because this is where it turns. What my parents did next is the part people can't believe when I tell it. Christmas morning, I was wandering the bakery aisle with my phone against my shoulder, a chocolate cake in one hand, my dad's favorite, and eyeing an apple pie, my mom's. Normally, I bought both. This year, I called to ask which one she wanted, since dessert was already overflowing at dinner. The silence after my question ran long enough that I checked my screen to see if the call had dropped. When my mom finally spoke, her voice had that careful softness she used when she wanted something ugly to sound harmless. "Oh, we already did Christmas last night." I actually smiled, thinking she meant they'd opened a couple of gifts early. I asked what she meant. She explained almost casually that everyone had already been together the night before, so they'd just done dinner and presents then. Like it had happened spontaneously. Like nobody had noticed I wasn't there until the dishes were already washed. Cake box started cutting into my thumb. "You planned it without me?" There was movement on the line. Then my dad's voice replaced hers, flat and unbothered. "Honestly, Reagan, everything was easier without you there." The fluorescent lights above me suddenly felt too bright. Somewhere behind me a kid was begging for frosted cookies. My father calmly explained that lately I questioned everything, corrected people, and made gatherings tense. They'd wanted one peaceful Christmas. He said it like it had been a reasonable, practical decision. I didn't defend myself. I didn't list every holiday I'd organized. I didn't mention the house. I just stood there holding a chocolate cake and listened until there was nothing left to misunderstand. I put the apple pie back on the shelf. My hands were steady, which somehow made everything feel stranger. I bought the cake anyway, because apparently my body had decided finishing the shopping trip was easier than figuring out what came next. In the parking lot, I sat behind the wheel without turning the key. My parents' gifts were in the trunk. My mom's coffee was in a bag on the seat. The envelope for the house transfer was tucked in my purse. For years, I'd always had somewhere to be on Christmas morning. Now there was just a cake nobody was waiting for. I drove without picking a destination. About 15 minutes later, I passed a community center my company had sponsored during a winter donation drive. A banner outside mentioned a Christmas meal for families in transitional housing. I almost kept driving. Then I looked at the cake beside me and turned around. Plan was simple: drop it off, wish someone a Merry Christmas, leave. Inside, the room smelled like coffee and roasted turkey, paper snowflakes taped crookedly to the walls. A volunteer checked that the cake was sealed before accepting it. That's when I noticed her. A little girl, maybe 8, dark hair in a loose ponytail, sleeves too long for her arms, standing beside a woman holding a bag of donated clothes. The girl wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the cake like it had appeared from somewhere improbable. "Wait, is that whole cake actually ours to keep?" she asked, checking the rules before she let herself be excited. I told her it was. Her face opened into a smile that vanished the instant she glanced at her mother, as if joy required permission first. I didn't know yet that her name was Nadia, or that her mother's name was Vanessa Cole, or that in about 10 minutes this shelter would completely rearrange what I thought I was supposed to do with the house sitting empty in Wyoming, Michigan. I meant to leave right after. Instead, I stayed near the entrance while a staff member found space for my grocery bags. Vanessa and I ended up talking not because I pushed for it, but because we happened to be standing at the same folding table. The story came out gradually and without self-pity. She'd worked as a scheduling coordinator for a home healthcare agency that folded that fall. She had some savings, expected to find something new within weeks. Then her landlord sold the building. She needed first month's rent, a deposit, and proof of income, right when she'd just lost hers. By December, she and Nadia were staying in transitional family housing while she interviewed and tried to keep Nadia in the same school. She wasn't asking me for anything. She was solving the next problem the way you describe a broken furnace. This happened, then this happened, now I'm handling it. Nadia had wandered over, peeling a loose paper snowflake off the wall. Without looking up, she said, "My mom keeps saying we just need one thing to finally go right." That sentence lodged itself somewhere in my chest. I'd spent the morning holding a gift worth over $300,000 for people who'd already decided they could celebrate Christmas without me. In front of me was a woman who wasn't asking for a handout, just the dignity of being heard. "Do you want to change your life?" I asked Vanessa. I clarified immediately I wasn't offering a house or promises I couldn't keep, just that I knew people connected to legitimate transitional housing programs and I could find out what existed beyond the shelter system. She asked smart, careful questions. Was it legitimate? Would it affect the support she already had? I told her I'd find out rather than pretend I already knew. That restraint made me trust her more. Back in my car, the passenger seat was empty. Cake was already becoming someone else's Christmas dessert. I thought about my parents measuring curtains. I thought about the reading chair. And then a quieter question surfaced. Why was I still finishing a gift for people who'd already decided they owned it and decided I was optional? I emailed my attorney and left a voicemail. Withdraw consent, halt the transfer, no further steps. Then I called my mother. I kept it short. I told her I wasn't moving forward with the house, and that I'd just come from a family shelter and was considering whether the property might eventually support a transitional housing program instead. I hadn't promised it to anyone. I didn't know yet what shape that would take. She was too stunned to argue. I hung up before the usual cycle could start. Guilt, explanation, me fixing everything so nobody had to stay uncomfortable. For the next few hours I tried to do nothing. I put away groceries for a dinner I wasn't attending. I stashed my parents' wrapped gifts in the hall closet because looking at them made my stomach tighten. My phone buzzed repeatedly. I let it. Almost exactly 3 hours after Nadia asked if the cake was really for them, my mother's name lit up my screen again. This time I answered. She was already furious. Somewhere in the gap between our calls, my mention of transitional housing had transformed into a certainty that I was handing the house to total strangers. She demanded to know how I could pull it away after she and my dad had built their entire retirement around it. Then she said the sentence that changed everything. "That's our house, Reagan. You don't get to hand it to people we've never even met." I looked across my apartment at the transfer envelope, still sitting where I dropped my purse. Our house. The silence on the line was immediate. She tried to correct herself. She meant the house I'd promised them, the one they'd already started planning their life around. But the correction couldn't erase what had come out first. "It was never yours to claim, Mom." She pivoted back to Christmas, accusing me of turning one dinner into punishment for the entire family. Explaining why everyone had wanted a quieter evening, she let something else slip. They hadn't decided the night before. They'd decided the previous weekend. "We figured you'd get over it," she said. That sentence landed differently than my dad's cruelty in the grocery store. He told me I was unwanted. She'd just told me they knew I'd be hurt, and had built my eventual forgiveness into the plan from the start. I ended the call. The house would stay mine whether they accepted it or not. But that wasn't what kept me up that night. My mom knew. My dad knew. Paige had been there. Other relatives had apparently been there too. Someone had built a plan, and everyone else had simply stepped into it. What I didn't know yet was how many of them had known I was being cut out, or what story they'd been told to make my empty chair feel normal. Monday morning, my attorney confirmed by email. The transfer had never gone through, and my instructions had stopped it cold. The house was still entirely mine. One paragraph settled what my family had spent Christmas treating like a catastrophe. The legal part was simple. What I couldn't stop replaying was what my mom had let slip. They decided a full week before Christmas that it would happen without me. My phone had been busy all weekend. My dad left one voicemail accusing me of using money to punish people. My mom sent texts insisting nobody meant to exclude me permanently, as if there were acceptable degrees of exclusion. Paige's message was the most honest one. She said she'd assumed I already knew about the change, and that taking back the house felt like an enormous overreaction to a scheduling decision. I didn't answer any of them right away. Instead, at work, my coworker Brooke Sullivan stopped by my desk with her phone already out. "Okay, don't be weird about this," she said. "But isn't this your family?" She turned the screen toward me, a public post from a cousin's account, photos from Christmas Eve dinner. My parents' dining table, a stack of gifts, my dad mid-laugh raising a glass. I hadn't been looking for it. I stared at the caption. Best Christmas Eve in years, so good to have everyone together. Everyone. I scrolled through 6 photos. I wasn't in a single one, and nobody seemed to be looking for me in the frame either. That afternoon, my Aunt Renata called. Her voice had the specific discomfort of someone realizing they'd participated in something without understanding what it was. She told me she'd asked about me when the date changed, and my mom had told her I had other plans and everyone should just take advantage of the earlier night. The gathering hadn't formed by accident. The story had been circulating, and everyone had accepted it, for a week before I found out I wasn't in it. Paige came to my apartment that Tuesday, smoothing her coat sleeves even after taking it off, a nervous habit I'd known since childhood. She explained that my mom had told her the same thing she told Renata, that I had other plans. She admitted it was strange that I hadn't helped organize anything, but once dinner started, she just accepted the story because it was easier. She still thought I'd gone too far with the house. In her mind, Christmas was emotional and the house was practical, 2 separate categories. She couldn't yet see that separating them was exactly what had let everyone treat me the way they had. So I asked her one question. Could you actually tell I wasn't in that room? She stopped fidgeting with her sleeve. The answer was written on her face before she said anything. Of course she'd noticed. I was always the one arriving early with bags in both hands, checking the oven, refilling drinks. My absence would have changed the shape of that room even if nobody said my name out loud. Then I asked the question that had actually been eating at me since Brooke's screenshot. If everyone really thought I had other plans, why didn't a single person text me Merry Christmas? Paige's eyes dropped. There was no answer that made it innocent. They'd exchanged gifts, eaten dinner, taken photos, talked about me enough to accept I was elsewhere. And not one person had sent even the kind of automatic holiday text you'd send a coworker you barely knew. I didn't think about it until right now, she admitted quietly. I believed her, and that was almost the worst part. It hadn't been deliberate cruelty. It was something quieter. Everyone had gotten so used to my presence being guaranteed that checking on it had simply stopped feeling necessary. Then something shifted behind her eyes. She said my dad had mentioned the house during dinner, something specific, not just in passing. She frowned, trying to recall the wording exactly. I stopped her. Think about it. Call me when you're sure. After she left, I stood at the window and watched her taillights disappear down the block. Until that moment, I'd believed the worst thing my family had done was celebrate Christmas without me. I was about to find out what they'd actually celebrated while I was gone. I drove to the bungalow the next morning and sat in the driveway with the engine running, staring at the frost on the lawn and the bay window my mom had loved on site. Inside, the rooms were technically empty but still crowded with everyone's plans. I could still see her stretching a tape measure across the windows. My dad claiming his reading corner. What I hadn't noticed before was how the language had shifted over those 2 visits. First it was the house I'm giving you. Then our retirement place. By the last visit, my mom was already talking about where our Christmas tree would go next year. Gratitude had quietly become ownership, and I'd mistaken it for excitement. My phone buzzed. My dad. He wanted to talk face-to-face like adults, a phrase that almost made me laugh, given that everyone had spent 3 days treating my decision like a tantrum that would dissolve if they just got me alone in a room long enough. He arrived 20 minutes later, glancing around the living room like he was checking whether anything had moved, his eyes landing briefly on the bare corner meant for his chair. He accused me of using money to control the family, said gifts weren't supposed to come with strings attached, and that pulling the house back over hurt feelings made the whole thing look like a business deal instead of a gift. I told him there'd never been any strings. I'd never once expected a toast in my honor or a reserved spot at the head of the table because my name was on the title. All I'd assumed was that my own parents wanted me there on Christmas morning. His jaw tightened. Christmas and the house are 2 separate issues, he said. That sentence told me everything. In his mind, I could be removed from the table while the gift stayed untouched. He saw no contradiction in deciding I ruined Christmas while still expecting the house I'd promised. Then he said it. A daughter who's done as well as you have should be glad to take care of her parents like this. I looked at the bay window. I had been glad to do it once. That was what made his sentence so ugly. Somewhere between my wanting to give and his expecting to receive, the gift had quietly turned into an obligation. I asked him directly whether he'd talked about the house at Christmas dinner. His eyes flicked to the kitchen doorway. He didn't answer. He started talking about retirement plans instead. I picked up my keys and locked the door behind us when we left. That afternoon, Paige called back. The uncertainty in her voice from Tuesday was gone, replaced by something closer to shame. She remembered now. Dinner was already underway, gifts stacked by the tree, when my dad raised his glass and made an announcement about the coming year. By this time next year, he'd said, raising his glass, we'll be hosting Christmas at the new house. People had lifted their glasses. Someone had congratulated my parents. They'd toasted the bungalow, the house I hadn't yet given them, in front of a table I hadn't been invited to on a night I still thought I was expected the next day. I sat on the floor of that empty living room after the call ended, my back against the wall beneath the bay window. I didn't invent details I hadn't been told. I just knew what Paige had confirmed. My family had gathered for a Christmas deliberately kept from me. My mother had lied about why. My father had raised a glass to a future inside a house I was giving them. And everyone had celebrated. I understood something worse than simply being excluded. They'd been perfectly willing to enjoy what I gave them without needing the person who gave it. If you think that toast was the worst of it, subscribe now, because what my father says to my face a few months later is even harder to hear. I didn't decide the house's fate in one dramatic moment. Over the following weeks, I waited for the anger to cool enough to know if the idea still made sense without it. Through the shelter, I met Ruth Calloway, the coordinator for a regional transitional housing nonprofit. She explained how it worked. Families kept the title, the nonprofit ran a long-term use agreement, and screened families lived there 9 to 12 months while working with case managers, saving, and job hunting. I made one thing clear to Ruth. I wasn't asking for Vanessa and Nadia to be chosen because I'd met them at a shelter on Christmas. If I did this, the program decided who qualified, not my feelings. I declined access to applicant files entirely. For the first time, helping didn't require controlling who benefited. My attorney reviewed everything: inspections, insurance, written responsibilities. Took weeks, not hours, which mattered to me. Christmas had forced one snap decision. Everything after deserved patience. Meanwhile, my family kept testing whether the old Reagan still existed. My dad called about a warranty issue and expected me to handle it like always. I gave him the customer service number instead. He accused me of still punishing him. My mom hosted a family lunch and for once picked the date herself. The lunch was a little clumsier without me managing it, and everyone survived just fine. By spring, the inspection was done, the agreement signed, and the first placement was approved. I asked Ruth not to tell me who it was. When she called weeks later, breathless, to say Vanessa and Nadia had been selected through the standard screening. Not because of me. I stood in a parking lot with the wind moving through new leaves and felt something settle for the first time since Christmas. I just don't want you thinking this makes us your responsibility, Vanessa said. I know, I told her. It was a bridge, not a claim on my life. My mom asked to see me alone, not my dad, not Paige. She chose a coffee shop halfway between us, which I was grateful for. At my parents' kitchen table, I'd have known where the napkins were, which cabinet held the mugs, how fast I'd start clearing dishes out of habit. She looked smaller than I remembered, though nothing about her had physically changed. She said she missed me. Not the house. Not the way I organized everything. Her daughter. For a second, that was almost enough. Then she said what happened after Christmas had gone too far. The distance, the tension, the house. She and my dad had built real plans around it. I reminded her they were still safely in their current home. The transfer had never completed. She understood the legal distinction. What she couldn't get past was the promise. I asked her the question I'd stopped needing an answer to but still wanted spoken out loud. "Which one of you came up with it first?" She stared out the window for a long moment. My dad had suggested celebrating without me, but she'd agreed. And she was the one who told the whole family I had other plans, not because he ordered her to, but because it was easier than admitting they'd simply chosen not to invite me. "If keeping things calm means erasing one person from the room, that's not peace," I told her. "That's just a smaller family." She didn't argue with the wording this time. Before we left, she asked about the house. I told her it was now part of the transitional program, and that Vanessa and Nadia had been chosen through the same process as every other family. She sat with that information quietly, then reached for her coffee and found it had gone cold. I saw the grief in that small motion, and for the first time I could feel sorry for her without feeling obligated to fix it. She hugged me on the way out, hesitant, like she wasn't sure I'd hug her back. I did. Months later, at an ordinary family dinner, my dad asked me to stay behind after everyone else was pulling on coats. He said the family needed to move on. He said he was even willing to let the house issue go, like it was something he had the standing to forgive me for. "What is it you actually think you did wrong?" I asked. He said he regretted how I'd found out. Regretted the distance. Regretted losing the house. He never once named the actual choice. So I asked again, quieter. What did he think he'd done to me? His shoulders dropped, not surrender, exhaustion. And then, for the first time, he told me the plain truth. He hadn't wanted me at Christmas because he was tired of feeling challenged. He wanted one evening where nobody had to think twice about what they said. I asked why he'd been so sure the hurt wouldn't last. He looked at me, and for once there was no anger in his face, just the flat certainty of a man reading off years of evidence. "'Cause you never actually leave, Reagan. You always circle back." That sentence landed harder than anything he'd said all year. He hadn't believed I'd be fine. He'd believed it wouldn't cost him anything because I always circled back eventually anyway. Every birthday I organized while still angry, every apology I accepted before I understood what I was forgiving, I had called that love. He had learned to read it as a guarantee. I told him I wasn't asking him to agree with every boundary I'd set. I just wasn't going back to a role where my presence was optional and my labor was mandatory. He asked if I still considered myself part of the family. "I'm your daughter," I said. That never changed. But if family means you get permanent access to my time and money no matter how you treat me, I'm finished with that version. He didn't answer. I picked up my coat and left. I didn't turn around on the drive home. For the first time, it didn't feel like I was leaving my family behind. It felt like I'd finally stopped leaving myself behind to stay with them. If you never actually leave, you always circle back, hit you as hard as it hit me writing it, smash that like button. That one line is basically the whole story. By the next Christmas, Vanessa had kept her job, built up savings, and was already talking with Ruth about moving from transitional housing into something permanent. Nadia was still at the same school, still furious at math homework on principal. My relationship with my mom had become slower and more honest, if not always easy. Paige and I were closer than we'd been in years. My dad and I stayed distant, not because he'd gotten crueler, but because he'd lost the one thing he'd always counted on, certainty that I'd come back on command. That turned out to cost him more than the house ever did. On Christmas Eve, my mom called. She'd seen a year-end post from the nonprofit, a wreath on the bungalow's door, Nadia untangling string lights, me laughing at something out of frame. She didn't ask if I regretted it. She just said the house looked full of life. Then she said something else. "I just hope tonight you're somewhere that actually wants you there." A year earlier, she'd have asked if I was coming home. The difference was only a few words. Felt enormous. That Christmas, I wasn't at my parents' house, and I wasn't avoiding it either. I was simply where I'd chosen to be. Small gathering. Vanessa and Nadia. Friends who'd become part of my year in ways I hadn't expected. I'd been assigned dessert because everyone knew I liked the bakery near my apartment. I carried in a chocolate cake with both hands, and for 1 second the memory of the grocery store hit me so clearly I could feel the box cutting into my thumb again. Nadia spotted the cake immediately. This time she didn't ask if the whole thing was really for them. She just grinned and announced she wanted the corner piece. I found my chair already set, napkin folded, glass already out, nothing symbolic about it. Someone had simply counted me in before I arrived. I hadn't earned that seat. I was just part of the people gathered around it. If you've ever had to take back something you gave out of love, not to punish anyone but to finally protect yourself, tell me in the comments where you drew that line. And if this story meant something to you, hit subscribe because Silent Revenge has a lot more of these stories coming and you don't want to miss the next one.